If you walk into a modern classroom today and get in trouble, the consequences usually aren't life-altering. You might get a stern lecture from the teacher, have your smartphone confiscated for the afternoon, or perhaps spend an hour in detention sitting quietly and doing your homework. To a student in the 21st century, these consequences can feel severe and unfair. However, if we take a look back at the educational systems of the 19th and early 20th centuries, we reveal a starkly different and much darker reality. During the Victorian era and stretching well into the early 1900s, the philosophy of spare the rod and spoil the child was taken to literal and often brutal extremes. In this era, teachers were not just educators, they were authorized disciplinarians. They utilized devices that looked more like medieval torture implements than educational tools. What makes this history truly chilling is that these punishments were not the actions of rogue, abusive individuals. They were standard, parent-approved school policies. Today, we are going to analyze 10 normalized school punishments from the past. These are practices that, if attempted in a classroom today, would likely result in immediate arrest, felony charges for child abuse, and the permanent revocation of a teaching license. The heavy slate. Let's start with the punishment designed to induce physical failure, the heavy slate. In the 1800s, before paper was cheap and affordable, students used writing slates, heavy pieces of stone framed in wood. Now, imagine the offense. A student is caught whispering to a neighbor or perhaps passing a note, the historical equivalent of sending a text message. Maybe they simply forgot their homework. In the modern era, a teacher might just take the distraction away, but back then, the tool of distraction became the instrument of torture. The student was forced to hold this heavy slate directly above their head. And we aren't talking about a lightweight tablet. These slates could weigh as much as a gallon of milk. This wasn't a momentary penalty. Students were required to maintain this position, arms locked out, for up to an hour. Physiologically, this is known as a stress position. Holding a weight overhead for an extended period causes rapid lactic acid buildup. Within minutes, the deltoid muscles begin to burn. Soon after, the arms start shaking uncontrollably and the back muscles begin to spasm. If the student lowered their arms even an inch due to muscle failure, the teacher would simply add more time to the clock. It was common for children to end up in tears or even faint from physical exhaustion. Today, forcing a child into a painful stress position is categorized as physical abuse in almost every legal jurisdiction. Number 9. The slate frame wrap. Moving on to number 9, we stay with the writing slate, but this time it is used as a blunt weapon. This punishment was known as the slate frame wrap. The offense here was often academic, making mistakes in writing or having poor penmanship. Instead of extra tutoring, the teacher would utilize the hard wooden frames surrounding the writing stone. If a student made an error, the teacher would grasp the slate and violently rap the hard wooden edge against the student's knuckles. This punishment was often calculated for maximum pain. Teachers would instruct students to hold their hands out, palm down, with fingers spread wide to expose the knuckles fully. If a student flinched or pulled away in fear, the subsequent blow would be delivered with double the force. The irony of this punishment was its complete counterproductivity. Students would return home with swollen, bruised, or even broken fingers, the very tools they needed to improve their writing. Yet, parents often viewed these injuries as evidence of strict, high-quality schooling rather than assault. In a modern context, deliberately targeting a child's joints with a hard object is nothing short of felony assault. Number 8. The balancing beam. At number 8, we have a punishment where public humiliation meets physical danger, the balancing beam. This was often the consequence for forgotten homework or general unruliness. Teachers would place a narrow wooden beam at the front of the classroom. The offending student was forced to climb up and stand on this precipice for hours. To increase the difficulty, sadistic teachers would sometimes force the student to hold heavy books while balancing. This punishment combined physical strain with intense psychological pressure. As the students' legs cramped and their feet went numb from the pressure, they had to fight to maintain their balance. If they fell off, the timer would simply restart. This was performed in front of the entire class, turning the students' suffering into a spectator sport. The fear of falling, combined with the pain of standing on a narrow surface, constitutes a form of physical endangerment that no modern school board would tolerate for a second. Number 7, the water bucket hold. Number 7 is a punishment that targeted biology itself, the water bucket hold. In the 1930s and earlier, being left-handed was often viewed with superstition. It was sometimes considered a sign of evil, bad luck, or moral failing. Educators felt that it was their duty to cure this trait. Of course, it was also used for common crimes like passing notes. Students were forced to stand with their arms extended horizontally in a T pose, holding a heavy bucket of water in each hand. To make the punishment even crueler, some teachers would add salt to the water. This is a severe isometric exercise. Within 2 minutes, the shoulders feel like they're on fire. By 5 minutes, the muscles reach total failure. When the student inevitably dropped the buckets due to exhaustion, the water would splash all over them. If the water was salted, it would sting any open cuts or sores the child might have had from previous disciplines. This systematic targeting of a biological trait like handedness through physical torture is a clear violation of human rights by today's standards. Coming in at number 6 is a device that looks like it belongs in a dungeon, not a schoolhouse, the posture collar. The offense? Simply slouching, dozing off, or having poor posture. The posture collar was a stiff device made of wood or leather that wrapped tightly around the neck. It functioned similarly to a medieval neck brace, making it physically impossible for the student to look down, rest their chin, or slouch. Students were forced to wear these for hours on end, attempting to eat lunch or write their lessons while their heads were locked in a rigid, upright position. Astonishingly, this was not seen as abuse, but a premium feature. Schools actually advertised the use of these collars to parents as a method of character building. Parents would pay premium tuition for schools that guaranteed their children would have military-grade posture, completely ignoring the bruising and psychological trauma that came with being locked in a restraint device all day. Number 5, the balance yoke. Similar to the collar, number 5 is the balance yoke, another method designed to enforce straight spines through crushing weight. If a student continued to display bad posture, a heavy wooden bar, resembling a gym barbell, was locked across their shoulders. Small buckets of sand hung from each end of the bar. The mechanism was simple but cruel. The device required perfect equilibrium. If the student slouched or leaned even a little, the buckets would tip, dumping sand all over the student and the floor. The punishment for spilling was simply a refill of the buckets and an extension of the time. Students had to navigate their entire school day, writing, eating, standing to recite, with a heavy wooden yoke locked to their body. Today, locking a heavy restraint onto a child is considered false imprisonment and child endangerment. Number 4, the bell ringer. Number 4 is a punishment that turned the school's equipment into a torture device, the bell ringer. The offense here was usually ringing the school bell at the incorrect time or playing with the rope. The punishment fit the crime in a twisted, poetic way. The teacher would tie the student's hands high up onto the bell rope. The student was forced to stand there, arms extended upward, for hours. This was a test of endurance with a built-in alarm system. As the students' arms succumbed to gravity and exhaustion, their weight would pull the rope, causing the bell to ring. Every ring announced to the school and the surrounding town that the student had failed to hold on. It was a cycle of physical pain and public signaling of weakness. Leaving a child tied up in a stress position is a textbook definition of physical abuse. Number 2, the lazy log. Number 2 is a punishment designed to carry shame beyond the classroom, the lazy log. The offense was laziness, a vague term which could include daydreaming, looking out the window, or answering questions too slowly. Teachers kept a collection of heavy logs, usually oak or maple, in the classroom. When a student was deemed lazy, a log, sometimes weighing as much as a small tree, was chained to their ankle. The student was not just tethered to the desk, they were tethered to the log for everything. They had to drag it to the chalkboard to answer questions, drag it to the outhouse, and, most cruelly, drag it all the way home at the end of the day. The logs were often carved with insults like lazy boy or sloth. This ensured that the punishment extended beyond the school walls, inviting ridicule from townspeople and neighbors. The physical strain of dragging a heavy weight by the ankle caused permanent back and hip issues for many developing children. Number 1. The correction cage. And finally, at number 1, perhaps the most dystopian of all historical punishments, the correction cage. Used primarily in certain European schools, this punishment was reserved for whispering or disrupting the class. The device was exactly what it sounds like, a metal cage suspended from the classroom ceiling or mounted high on the wall. The spectacle was horrifying. A misbehaving child was locked inside this cage, often dangling 3 feet or more off the ground. They were forced to watch their classmates continue lessons while they hung there like a human chandelier. Some schools even positioned these cages near windows so that people walking by on the street could see the bad children. This punishment combined false imprisonment, extreme public humiliation, and the physical danger of being suspended in a small crate. The fact that parents often thanked teachers for this character building highlights a profound societal disconnect regarding the welfare of children in the past. Conclusion. The evolution of the education system is often measured in curriculum changes or technological advancements, but perhaps the most significant shift has been in the recognition of students' humanity. The punishments we have detailed today, from the heavy slate to the correction cage, reveal a past where children were viewed as raw materials to be hammered into shape, rather than human beings to be nurtured. The methods used to correct behavior were physically damaging and psychologically scarring. In the modern legal landscape, these actions meet the criteria for assault, battery, child endangerment, and false imprisonment. While today's students may complain about a boring lecture or a confiscated phone, the history of the classroom serves as a grim reminder that the good old days were for many children a time of legalized torture.